Sometimes the smallest gift carries the heaviest memory, and sometimes the quietest child changes the loudest heart. No one expected the little girl, standing near the back of the ballroom, to become the moment everyone would remember. The annual Hope Horizon Foundation Gala had drawn governors, celebrities, investors, and some of the wealthiest business leaders in America to downtown Chicago. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm light across polished marble floors, while a string quartet filled the air with elegant melodies that blended with soft conversations and polite applause. Every table displayed white roses, gold candles, and silver place settings that reflected years of success and unimaginable wealth. At the center of it all stood Victoria Hayes, the billionaire CEO whose technology empire had transformed industries and whose name appeared on magazine covers almost every month. She smiled for photographers, shook hands with donors, thanked veterans, greeted children from local charities, and accepted another award with the same composed grace that had made her famous. To everyone watching, she looked untouchable, confident, perfect, unbreakable. Yet behind her calm expression was a loneliness no headline had ever captured. Across the room, Ethan Brooks adjusted the sleeves of his worn navy blazer as he looked down at his 8-year-old daughter. Lily held a tiny gift box wrapped in pale blue paper, its corners slightly uneven, its ribbon tied by hands still learning patience. She had insisted on wrapping it herself, refusing every offer of help from her father. Ethan knelt beside her and smiled softly. "You don't have to give it to her if you get nervous." Lily hugged the little box closer to her chest and shook her head. "Mom always said the best gifts are the ones people never expect." Ethan felt those words settle quietly inside him. For just a second, he could almost hear his late wife's voice saying them again. He brushed a loose strand of blonde hair behind Lily's ear. "Then whatever happens, I'm already proud of you." Lily nodded, took one slow breath, and watched Victoria from across the crowded ballroom. People surrounded the famous CEO. Everywhere she moved, executives wanted photographs. Reporters wanted interviews. Investors wanted meetings. Children wanted autographs. It seemed impossible for one small girl to ever reach her. But Lily didn't see a billionaire. She saw someone whose smile looked beautiful and somehow very sad. She tightened her fingers around the tiny package. Inside wasn't jewelry. It wasn't anything expensive. It wasn't even something anyone else would notice. It was simply a handmade friendship bracelet woven with faded blue thread, tiny white beads, and one carefully folded note written in the neatest handwriting an 8-year-old could manage. Ethan had no idea what Lily had written. She had called it a secret, and he respected that. As Victoria finished another conversation and turned toward the next line of waiting guests, Lily quietly stepped away from her father. One small step, then another. No cameras followed her. No reporters noticed. No one in the ballroom imagined that the smallest person in the room was walking toward the woman everyone believed had everything. Lily walked carefully between tables dressed in white linen, her small sneakers making almost no sound against the polished marble floor. Adults carrying sparkling glasses barely noticed her as conversations drifted from stock prices to charitable donations and expansion plans. She held the little blue box with both hands as though it contained something far more valuable than thread and paper. Ethan remained where he was, resisting every instinct to call her back. Trust had become one of the greatest lessons he could offer his daughter. Ever since her mother passed away 4 years earlier, Lily had carried a quiet courage that often surprised him. She did not speak loudly. She did not demand attention. She simply believed that kindness always found its way to the right person. Victoria Hayes had just finished thanking another donor when her assistant, Olivia Carter, leaned closer. "You still have the interview with National Business Weekly in 15 minutes, followed by the scholarship presentation." Victoria nodded automatically, barely listening. Her schedule had become a language she no longer questioned. Every hour was planned. Every smile was expected. Every appearance was another responsibility attached to a company worth billions of dollars. Then she noticed movement near the edge of the crowd. A little blonde girl stood quietly only a few feet away, waiting without interrupting anyone. Unlike everyone else, the child was not holding a phone, a business card, or a camera. She simply waited with remarkable patience. Victoria gently excused herself from the conversation and turned toward her. "Hello there," she said with a warm smile that felt more genuine than any she had offered all evening. "What is your name?" Lily looked up with bright blue eyes. "My name is Lily Brooks." Victoria lowered herself until they were nearly eye level. "It is very nice to meet you, Lily." The room continued moving around them, but for a brief moment neither of them seemed to notice the noise. Lily extended the tiny blue package with both hands. "I made something for you." Victoria blinked with quiet surprise. "For me?" Lily nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Olivia instinctively stepped forward. "Miss Hayes, I should probably check the package first." Victoria raised one gentle hand without taking her eyes off the little girl. "It is all right." There was something in Lily's expression that carried no fear, no expectation, and no hidden motive. It was simply kindness offered without condition. Victoria accepted the small box carefully, almost reverently. It weighed next to nothing. She smiled softly. "Thank you. This is very thoughtful." Lily's cheeks turned slightly pink. "I hope it helps." Victoria tilted her head with quiet curiosity. "Helps with what?" Lily hesitated before answering in the simple, honest way only children often could. "Sometimes people smile because everyone is looking. My daddy says there's another kind of smile that happens when nobody is watching. I thought maybe you needed one of those." The words settled over Victoria like a gentle snowfall. Around them, conversations continued, cameras flashed, and crystal glasses clinked together, but every sound seemed to drift farther away. For reasons she could not explain, her fingers tightened ever so slightly. Around the tiny blue box. Across the ballroom, Ethan watched in silence, confused by the unexpected stillness on the billionaire's face. He had no idea what Lily had just said. He only saw Victoria Hayes looking at his daughter as though the little girl had somehow spoken directly to a place inside her that the rest of the world had forgotten existed. Victoria looked down at the tiny blue package resting in her hands. The ribbon was tied with uneven loops, and a small corner of the wrapping paper had folded over itself as though tiny fingers had struggled to make everything perfect. Instead of opening it immediately, she traced the edge of the box with her thumb, almost afraid to disturb whatever care had gone into creating it. Olivia glanced discreetly at her watch. "Miss Hayes, the press room is ready whenever you are." Victoria did not answer. Her attention remained on Lily. "Would you mind if I opened it now?" she asked gently. Lily smiled. "That is why I brought it." Victoria carefully untied the ribbon instead of tearing it. The room around them continued moving with polished efficiency, but something about her deliberate movements slowed time. She lifted the lid. Inside lay a simple friendship bracelet woven from faded blue embroidery thread with tiny white beads placed at uneven intervals. Beneath it rested a folded note decorated with little hand-drawn stars. Victoria picked up the bracelet first. The moment the soft thread touched her fingertips, her breathing almost stopped. Her eyes fixed on the familiar weaving pattern. One blue strand, two white strands, then another blue strand crossing through the center. It was not expensive. It was not fashionable. It was not something anyone would find in a luxury boutique. But she had seen that exact pattern before. Many years ago, long before boardrooms, long before billion-dollar contracts, long before magazine covers and private aircraft. Her older sister, Emily, had taught her that braid during one unforgettable summer beside a quiet lake in northern Wisconsin. They had spent hours sitting on an old wooden dock making friendship bracelets from craft store thread while promising they would always stay together no matter where life carried them. Victoria had not thought about those afternoons in decades. She slowly unfolded the little note. Written in careful pencil letters were the words, "My mommy used to say that when someone feels lonely, you cannot always fix it, but you can remind them they matter. I hope this helps you remember." Victoria stared at the paper without blinking. The handwriting was innocent, imperfect, completely sincere. A warm memory drifted into her heart before she could stop it. Emily laughing as lake water sparkled behind her. their mother bringing lemonade onto the porch, their father pretending not to know how to braid thread, just so his daughters could teach him. Those memories had once filled every corner of her life. Then success had arrived, one meeting at a time, one promotion after another, until the calendar replaced birthdays and earnings reports replaced family dinners. Emily had passed away after a long illness years earlier, and somewhere along the way Victoria had quietly locked every memory behind walls she believed would protect her from pain. She had convinced herself that looking forward was stronger than looking back. Yet one handmade bracelet from a little girl had unlocked a door she had forgotten existed. Olivia noticed the change immediately. Victoria's shoulders relaxed. The confident executive standing before donors seemed to disappear, replaced by a younger woman carrying memories too precious to explain. Across the ballroom, Ethan watched Lily standing patiently with her hands folded behind her back. His daughter was not asking whether the gift had been liked. She was simply waiting, trusting that kindness never demanded an answer. Victoria finally looked up. Her eyes glistened beneath the warm chandelier lights. She smiled, but this time the smile did not belong to the famous chief executive admired by the world. It belonged to a sister who had suddenly found a forgotten piece of home in the smallest gift she had ever received. For several long seconds, neither Victoria nor Lily spoke. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable, untouched by expectation or ceremony. Around them, the gala continued. Exactly as planned. Waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling water and desserts. Kamera shatters klicked. Donors exchanged polished smiles. Somewhere across the ballroom, the string quartet began another familiar melody. Yet for Victoria, every sound seemed distant, as though she had stepped outside the evening without ever leaving the room. She slipped the little bracelet gently over her wrist. It fit almost perfectly. Olivia blinked in surprise. She had watched Victoria receive priceless watches from heads of state and custom jewelry from international partners. Yet none of those gifts had ever gone on immediately. Victoria looked at the simple blue thread resting against her skin and smiled with quiet gratitude. "Thank you, Lily," she whispered. "I do not think anyone has given me something this meaningful in a very long time." Lily smiled with the uncomplicated confidence only children possess. "My mommy said people remember how you make them feel more than what you give them." Victoria lowered her eyes for a moment. "Your mother sounds like she was a remarkable woman." Lily nodded proudly. "She still is. Daddy says love does not stop just because somebody goes to heaven." Those words landed softly inside Victoria's heart. She slowly looked across the ballroom until her eyes found Ethan waiting several yards away. He stood with relaxed shoulders and quiet patience, never trying to interrupt the moment or draw attention to himself. He did not wave. He did not approach. He simply waited until his daughter finished what she had come to do. Victoria had spent years meeting ambitious people. She knew the subtle language of hidden expectations. Some wanted investments. Others wanted influence. Many wanted photographs that could open doors. But the man standing before her wanted none of those things. There was no impatience in his posture, no calculation in his expression, no silent request hiding behind kindness. He looked only at Lily, making sure she felt safe. Victoria rose slowly and walked toward him with the little box still in her hands. Ethan offered a polite smile. "I hope she was not bothering you." Victoria shook her head almost immediately. "Not all. She reminded me of something I thought I had lost." Ethan glanced briefly toward the bracelet on her wrist and smiled with quiet understanding. "She spent almost 3 weeks making that." Victoria looked surprised. 3 weeks? Ethan nodded. She kept starting over whenever one of the beads was not perfectly straight. I told her nobody would notice. She said that kindness deserved careful hands. Victoria felt another wave of emotion she could not quite explain. She looked back at Lily, who was now admiring the flowers arranged across the nearest table, completely unaware of the impact she had made. "You have raised an extraordinary daughter," Victoria said softly. Ethan smiled, but there was humility instead of pride. "She teaches me much more than I teach her." Before Victoria could respond, another executive approached with an apologetic expression. "Miss Hayes, the scholarship presentation cannot wait any longer." Victoria glanced toward the stage, then back toward Ethan and Lily. For the first time in years, an important business event felt less urgent than an ordinary conversation. She hesitated, something almost unheard of for a woman whose entire career had been built on decisive action. As she finally turned toward the stage, she looked back one last time. Ethan had already knelt beside Lily, asking quietly whether she was ready to head home. Neither of them realized that the evening they believed had ended with one small gift had only just begun to change 3 lives forever. The gala ended, but the quiet feeling Lily had awakened refused to leave Victoria Hayes behind. Long after the final guest had departed and the ballroom lights had dimmed, she sat alone inside the back seat of her town car, turning the little friendship bracelet gently around her wrist. Chicago's skyline shimmered beyond the window, its glass towers reflecting the city lights like stars scattered across Lake Michigan. Her driver, Marcus Reed, glanced briefly into the rearview mirror before returning his attention to the road. During years of driving executives, he had learned when silence was more respectful than conversation. Victoria rested the tiny blue box. Beside her, and unfolded Lily's handwritten note once again. She read every word slowly, as though each sentence carried a meaning that revealed itself only after being visited more than once. "My mommy used to say that when someone feels lonely, you cannot always fix it, but you can remind them they matter." She closed her eyes. Those simple words echoed louder than any keynote speech she had delivered in boardrooms around the world. At the same moment, Ethan and Lily were riding the elevated train home. Lily leaned her head against her father's shoulder while the train rolled gently through the evening. She looked tired but peaceful. "Do you think Miss Hayes liked it?" she asked softly. Ethan smiled. "I think she loved it." Lily looked out the window at the passing lights. She looked lonely. Ethan waited a moment before answering. "Sometimes people carry things nobody else can see." Lily nodded as though that made perfect sense. Maybe now she knows somebody sees her. Ethan looked at his daughter with quiet admiration. Children, he often thought, somehow reached truths that adults spent entire lifetimes trying to explain. The following morning, Victoria arrived at Hayes Innovations headquarters earlier than usual. The 42nd floor overlooked nearly all of downtown Chicago, offering a breathtaking view that most visitors admired immediately. Today, however, she barely glanced outside. Instead, she placed the tiny blue box carefully inside the top drawer of her desk while leaving the bracelet on her wrist. Olivia entered carrying the day's schedule. "You have the board meeting at 9, the healthcare partnership at 11, lunch with investors at 1, and the acquisition review this afternoon." Victoria listened politely before asking an unexpected question. "Olivia, do we still have the guest registration list from last night's gala?" Olivia looked surprised. "Yes, I believe so. Could you find Ethan Brooks for me?" Olivia hesitated only briefly. "Would you like me to arrange a donation?" Victoria slowly shook her head. "No." "A job interview?" "No." "Then may I ask why?" Victoria smiled fondly. "Because I met someone who gave without asking for anything in return. I would simply like to know more about the father who raised a child like that." Olivia quietly nodded before leaving the office. Several hours later, she returned carrying a thin folder. "I found him." Victoria opened it with calm curiosity. There was no dramatic story on the first page. No headlines. No public recognition. Ethan Brooks worked as a maintenance supervisor at a neighborhood community center on the west side of Chicago. Widowed. 1 daughter. No outstanding debts. No lawsuits. No business connections. He volunteered twice each month at the local food pantry and coached youth baseball during the summer without accepting payment. Victoria continued reading in thoughtful silence. Every page described an ordinary life. Yet somehow, the more ordinary it appeared, the more extraordinary it became. She closed the folder gently and looked once more at the blue bracelet resting against her wrist. For the first time in many years, she found herself far more interested in meeting one humble father again than attending another meeting with people who believe success could be measured only by numbers. 3 days passed before Victoria made a decision that surprised even herself. Instead of sending an invitation through corporate channels or asking Ethan Brooks to visit her office, she quietly rearranged her Saturday morning. She wanted to see the life that had shaped Lily's remarkable kindness without the polished atmosphere of formal introductions. Marcus drove her across the city to the neighborhood community center where Ethan worked. The building was modest, built decades earlier, with red brick walls that had weathered countless Chicago winters. Children laughed on the basketball court behind the building while families came and went carrying sports equipment, library books, and grocery bags. Nothing about the place suggested wealth, but everything about it suggested people cared for one another. Victoria stepped out of the car wearing a simple navy sweater and blue jeans, clothing that allowed her to blend into the ordinary rhythm of the morning. She left her security team several blocks away, asking for privacy instead of protection. As she entered the community center, she noticed Ethan repairing a row of folding chairs for an after-school program. A small toolbox rested beside him, and every movement reflected patience rather than urgency. He tightened a loose bolt, tested the chair carefully, then smiled as one of the neighborhood children thanked him for fixing it. "Good as new," Ethan said warmly. "Just promise me you will not use it as a trampoline." The little boy laughed, promised he would not, and ran back toward the gymnasium. Ethan looked up and recognized Victoria almost immediately. Genuine surprise crossed his face. "Miss Hayes," she smiled. "Please call me Victoria." He stood and wiped his hands on a clean shop towel. "I was not expecting to see you here. I hope you do not mind a visit." Ethan shook his head. "Everyone is welcome here." Before either of them could continue, Lily came running from the art room carrying a paper covered with bright colors. She stopped suddenly when she recognized Victoria, and her face lit up with quiet excitement. "You are still wearing it." Victoria glanced at the blue bracelet on her wrist and smiled. "Every day." Lily grinned as though that answer alone had made her entire week. She handed Victoria the drawing without hesitation. It showed 3 people standing beneath a bright yellow sun, holding hands beside a lake with birds flying overhead. There were no names written anywhere, only smiling faces and a wide blue sky. Victoria studied the picture for a long moment. "It is beautiful." Lily pointed toward the tallest figure. "That is my daddy." Then she pointed toward the smallest one. "That is me." She hesitated before touching the third figure. "I did not know who she was when I started drawing, but I think maybe she was waiting to be happy again." Ethan looked gently embarrassed. "Lily has quite an imagination." Victoria continued looking at the drawing. Sometimes imagination notices what the rest of us overlook. Just then, an elderly volunteer approached Ethan carrying 2 heavy boxes of donated books. Without a second thought, Ethan stepped forward, took both boxes from her arms, and carried them inside before she even had the chance to ask for help. He did it naturally, quietly, and without looking around to see whether anyone had noticed. Victoria watched him disappear through the doorway, then looked back at Lily. In that simple moment, she began to understand something no financial report or background file could ever explain. Kindness was not something Ethan practiced only when people were watching. It had become the ordinary rhythm of his life, and somehow, without realizing it, he had taught his daughter to make compassion feel just as natural. After that Saturday morning, something subtle began to change. Victoria never announced another visit, yet the community center quietly found its way into her schedule whenever an hour unexpectedly opened between meetings. Sometimes she arrived carrying a box of books for the reading room. Other times, she simply stopped by to watch a youth basketball game or thank the volunteers preparing lunches for neighborhood families. She never arrived with photographers, and she never mentioned her donations. Ethan noticed the pattern, but never questioned it. He welcomed her the same way he welcomed every parent, volunteer, and visitor who walked through the front door. There were no special introductions, no reserved parking spaces, and no speeches. To him, everyone deserved the same respect. One crisp autumn afternoon, Victoria found Ethan repainting a weathered wooden bench outside the entrance while Lily sat nearby, finishing her homework. Golden leaves drifted across the sidewalk as a cool breeze carried the scent of fresh coffee from a nearby cafe. Victoria picked up a paintbrush resting on the ground. "Do you have room for one more volunteer?" Ethan looked up with a surprised smile. "Only if you do not mind getting paint on your shoes." She laughed softly. "I think I can survive that." For the next hour, they worked side by side without discussing business, investments, or success. Instead, they talked about favorite books, family traditions, baseball games at Wrigley Field, and the best places in Chicago to watch the first snowfall. Lily occasionally looked up from her homework and smiled every time she saw them laughing together. The conversation felt remarkably easy, as though they had known each other much longer than a few weeks. At one point, an elderly man approached carrying a broken walker. Before he could ask for help, Ethan immediately set down his brush and examined the damaged wheel. "Give me 10 minutes, he said kindly. "Let us see what we can do." Victoria watched as Ethan disappeared into the maintenance room and returned with a few simple tools. He repaired the loose bracket, tightened every bolt, cleaned the frame, and handed it back with a smile. "It should roll much better now." The gentleman reached for his wallet, but Ethan gently shook his head. "Please keep your money. Just promise me you will enjoy your afternoon walk." The man smiled gratefully and continued on his way. Victoria stood quietly for a moment before asking, "Do people often offer to pay you for things like that?" Ethan rinsed the paintbrush in a bucket of water and nodded. "Sometimes. Why do you almost always refuse?" He paused, considering the question carefully. "Because Lily is always watching." Victoria looked toward the little girl, who was helping a younger child solve a math problem with endless patience. Ethan continued in a calm voice. "Children learn far more from what we repeat than from what we say once. If she grows up believing every act of kindness needs a price tag, then I will have taught her the wrong lesson." Those words settled deep inside Victoria's heart. She had spent years measuring performance through quarterly reports, growth charts, and financial forecasts. Yet standing beside a freshly painted bench outside a neighborhood community center, she realized the most valuable legacy could never be calculated on a balance sheet. As the afternoon sun dipped lower across the Chicago skyline, she quietly understood that every visit had been changing more than her schedule. Without anyone noticing, Ethan and Lily were slowly teaching her how to recognize a kind of wealth she had almost forgotten existed. By early December, the community center had become brighter in ways no one could fully explain. The reading room had new shelves filled with books donated anonymously. The aging heating system that had struggled through every winter suddenly worked flawlessly after an unexpected grant covered the repairs. The after-school art program received fresh supplies, and every child was handed a new winter coat before the first heavy snowfall arrived. The letters thanking an unnamed benefactor were posted on the community bulletin board, but no signature ever appeared beneath them. Ethan simply smiled whenever people wondered who had been so generous. "Sometimes good things arrive because someone remembered to care," he would say, never trying to solve the mystery. Victoria listened quietly each time she visited, careful never to reveal that she had arranged every improvement through her foundation under the direction of anonymous giving. She had learned something from Ethan. Kindness did not become more valuable when people applauded it. One Friday evening, the community center hosted its annual holiday concert. Folding chairs filled the gymnasium, strings of white lights framed the stage, and families gathered carrying cups of hot chocolate, while children rehearsed songs behind the curtains. Snow drifted gently outside the tall windows, covering the sidewalks in a blanket of white that reflected the glow from the streetlights. Victoria arrived without an entourage and quietly took a seat near the back beside Olivia, who noticed her employer still wearing the faded blue friendship bracelet beneath the sleeve of her winter coat. "You have not taken it off once," Olivia whispered. Victoria smiled softly. Some reminders belong close to the heart. The concert began with cheerful holiday music, followed by poems, piano performances, and children's choirs. Laughter filled the room as proud parents applauded every performance, whether perfect or not. Ethan stood near the side wall helping volunteers adjust microphones and move chairs between acts while keeping one eye on Lily, who waited patiently with a large drawing tucked carefully beneath her arm. When her class finished singing, she walked directly toward Victoria instead of returning to her seat. "I made something else," Lily said with a shy smile. Victoria accepted the rolled piece of paper and carefully opened it across her lap. The drawing showed the same three people standing together beneath a bright sky, but this time there was something new. Behind them stood the community center, surrounded by children laughing, volunteers smiling, and families holding hands. Across the top, written in careful pencil, were the words, "Home is the place where people help each other feel less alone." Victoria stared at the picture as emotion quietly rose inside her. She noticed one final detail. Every person in the drawing held someone else's hand, creating one unbroken circle of kindness. There was no richest person, no poorest person, no important title, and no forgotten face. Only people choosing one another. Victoria looked at Lily with eyes shining beneath the warm lights. "How did you know this is exactly what I needed?" Lily answered with complete sincerity. "Because you smile differently now." Those 5 simple words reached deeper than any compliment Victoria had ever received. She felt tears gather before she could stop them. They were not tears of sadness or regret. They were the quiet tears of someone discovering that healing often arrives without announcement, wrapped inside ordinary moments shared with ordinary people. Without caring who might be watching, Victoria gently embraced Lily. The applause from the audience faded into the background as the little girl hugged her back with complete trust. Across the room, Ethan watched silently. And for the first time since losing his wife, he saw another wounded heart begin to believe that second chances sometimes arrive not through grand miracles, but through the gentle kindness of a child who simply refused to let anyone feel forgotten. The holiday concert ended with families gathering beneath softly glowing lights while children laughed. Volunteers stacked chairs, and the last notes of the piano slowly faded into a peaceful silence. Outside, gentle snow continued falling across the sidewalks of Chicago, covering the city with a quiet beauty that made even familiar streets feel new again. Victoria remained seated for a few moments longer, the drawing resting carefully in her lap and the blue friendship bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. She looked at Ethan as he thanked every volunteer before collecting empty paper cups and folding tables alongside everyone else. No one had asked him to stay late. No one was keeping score. He simply believed that leaving a place better than he found it was part of being grateful. Victoria walked toward him, carrying Lily's drawing with both hands. Ethan smiled warmly. "Thank you for coming tonight. It meant a great deal to Lily." Victoria looked at him with gentle sincerity. "I should be thanking both of you." She paused before continuing. "May I tell you something I have never shared during any interview or business speech?" Ethan nodded quietly. "Of course." Victoria glanced at Lily, who was helping another little girl gather sheet music from a stage. "When I first met your daughter, I believe she had given me a bracelet." She smiled softly as her fingers touched the faded blue thread. "Now I understand she gave me something much greater. She reminded me that success means very little if you forget how to see people." Ethan listened without interrupting. There was no desire to impress, no eagerness to respond with perfect words. He simply allowed her truth to exist. After a thoughtful silence, he said, "My wife used to tell Lily that every person carries a story we cannot see. Kindness begins when we remember that." Victoria felt her eyes grow warm once again. She must have been an extraordinary woman. Ethan smiled toward his daughter. "She still teaches us every day." Lily skipped over with her winter coat half-buttoned and slipped her small hand into her father's. "Daddy, are we ready?" Ethan nodded. Before they turned to leave, Victoria reached into her handbag and removed the folded drawing Lily had given her. She placed it carefully inside the little blue gift box that had remained on her desk ever since the gala. Closing the lid with quiet care, she held it against her heart for a brief moment. "I think these belong together," she whispered. Lily smiled. "That means you will not lose them." Victoria laughed gently. "Never." Months later, visitors to Victoria's office often noticed the simple blue. Box resting on a shelf beside awards worth millions of dollars and photographs with world leaders. Some assumed it contained valuable jewelry. Others guessed it held an important business contract. No one imagined it protected a handmade bracelet and two drawings created by a little girl whose greatest gift had never been thread or paper. It had been compassion. Whenever difficult decisions crossed her desk, Victoria would quietly open the box, read Lily's handwritten note, and remember that the strongest leaders were not the ones who inspired the loudest applause, but the ones who made people feel seen, respected, and valued. And somewhere across the city, Ethan and Lily continued living the same ordinary life they had always known, never realizing how deeply their quiet kindness had changed another human heart. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not arrive with headlines or celebrations. Sometimes they arrive wrapped in blue paper, carried by small hands, and leave behind a silence so full of grace that it echoes through a lifetime.